Snow fell on Ashbridge Hall the way grief settles on a man. Slowly. Then all at once, there was a door on the 3rd floor that no one was permitted to open. The key hung on its hook, exactly 6 inches from the man's hand. For 7 years, he passed it every night. For 7 years, he never once touched it. 3 housemaids had tried to take down the black mourning crepe in the hallway. Each time they were told the same thing: leave it. Behind the frost-covered iron gates, the fountain had been silent so long that no one remembered the sound of it. The ballroom was sealed. The pianoforte was draped in velvet like a sheet over a face. The whole house held its breath, waiting for something, or hiding from it. They whispered that he had not laughed in 7 years. Not once. The servants spoke of him the way you speak of the dead, what had happened on the night of January the 14th. Then from downstairs, a sound, small, sharp, and entirely out of place. The pen in his hand froze in mid-air. Snow fell on Ashbridge Hall the way grief settles on a man, slowly. Then all at once, the house had not heard laughter in 7 years. Not at Christmas, not at the harvest feasts. Not when Parliament sent its honours wrapped in ribbon and gold. Not even when his own brother stood in the doorway and begged him, voice cracking, to please. Just once. Live again, the Earl of Ashbridge had become a thing people whispered about. In drawing rooms, behind painted fans, in the candlelit parlours where the wealthy gathered to fear what they could not understand. Powerful, untouchable. A man so deep in his own sorrow that the servants spoke of him the way you speak of the dead. Ashbridge Hall had not changed in 7 years. That was the first thing anyone noticed. The way time had simply stopped at its iron gates. The way frost clung to the stone towers, as if even winter respected the grief of the house and dared not press too hard. The fountains in the front court had been frozen so long the servants no longer checked whether they still worked beneath the ice. The yew hedges had grown tall and dark, trimmed to a severe perfection, like sentinels standing watch over a tomb instead of a home. It was January. The sky over the Derbyshire moors was the colour of old pewter, low, still, pressing down on the estate like a lid on a pot that had long since gone cold. Inside, the air was quiet, not the quiet of peace, the quiet of something held still by force. Black mourning crepe still hung in the upper gallery, tucked into corners where 3 different housemaids had tried to take it down, and been told, each time, to leave it. The ballroom doors were sealed. The music room had a velvet cloth draped over the pianoforte, like a sheet over a face. The curtains had been drawn so long that the fabric had faded on the outer folds while staying dark on the inner. And on the 3rd floor, the nursery. The door had not opened since the night of January the 14th, 7 years before. The key had not moved from its hook. Aldous Greaves had hung it there himself, with his own hand, and he had not touched it since. He was 35 years old. Those who spoke of such things called him one of the most powerful men in England. He held 2 seats in Parliament through his estate interests. He oversaw 12,000 acres of farmland. Nearly 300 tenant families looked to the Greaves name, as their fathers had, and their fathers before them. His word in the House of Lords carried a particular weight. The weight of a man respected. Not because he was liked, but because he was always right. He had never been a cruel man. His tenants knew it, his servants knew it, his younger brother knew it better than anyone alive. But the man who sat now in the estate study, surrounded by ledgers and cold grey light and the smell of ink and old paper, that man was not easy to love. He was easy to fear, somewhat easier to respect, and nearly impossible to reach. Aldous moved his pen across the page without looking up. His desk was ordered with the precision of a man who controlled what he could, because he had once failed to control the only thing that mattered. Reports stacked by date, correspondence sorted by urgency. A single inkwell, which Mr. Pruitt, the butler, refilled every Monday morning. Whether it needed it or not, his coat was perfectly fitted, his cravat tied without a single wrinkle, his dark hair combed without vanity, and sent his face, which a society column had once called arresting in its severity, betrayed nothing at all. He finished a tenant's petition about drainage on the North Fields. Set it in the correct stack. He did not look out the window. There was no reason to look out the window. Nothing ever arrived. From downstairs, a door opened. He heard Mrs. Holloway's voice, low, clipped, surprised. And then a sound he had not heard in this house in years. A dog barking, small, sharp. Indignant, Aldous' pen stopped moving. He did not put it down, not right away. He held it above the page, listening, waiting for the sound to explain itself into something that asked nothing of him. It did not. He set the pen down. Now. The brother Lucian Greaves had spent the night before at his club in London. drinking rather more port than was wise, trying very hard not to think about what was about to happen at Ashbridge Hall. He had been trying not to think about it for 3 weeks, ever since the letter went out. The arrangements confirmed, the carriage hired. He was 29, dark-haired like his brother, but lighter, quicker, with a face that laughed easily and eyes that watched everything. People forgot when Lucien smiled that he was also thinking. He had spent 7 years watching his brother die, not quickly, not dramatically, just a little less of him each winter. He had tried everything, inviting Aldous to London, declined, bringing guests to Ashbridge, permitted once, then quietly never again. Speaking about Rosalind, met with a silence worse than any shout. 7 years of watching a man move through his own life like a guest in it. So Lucien had done a terrible thing. He had found a discreet marriage broker, a woman named Mrs. Whitcomb, who arranged private matches for families that preferred not to advertise their need for one. He had explained the situation, carefully, selectively, and he had arranged for a bride to travel to Ashbridge under the pretense of a formal introduction, using Aldous' name and the Ashbridge seal, which he had lifted from his brother's correspondence drawer 3 months before, and not yet returned. He knew it was wrong. He had known it was wrong when he did it, and he had done it anyway. Because the alternative, watching Aldous vanish into himself for another 7 years, had seemed worse than any anger his brother could throw at him. The woman Mrs. Whitcomb had found was named Cordelia Ashford, 25. Respectable family, no living parents, no fortune. She had worked as a companion and a music tutor, and she was, according to the broker's quiet inquiries, in a position of some difficulty, which Lucien had taken to mean. She needs this, as much as he does. He had told himself that made it all right. He was beginning to suspect it did not. The carriage had not been comfortable. Cordelia had known that when she hired it, the cheapest of the 3 in the village of Harrogate, the last town any size before the moor roads turned to frozen ruts and frozen silence. She had wrapped herself in her travelling cloak, tucked the dog under her arm, and reviewed the arrangement in her head for the 12th time. Looking for the one detail that would tell her she had made a mistake, she had not found one. The letter bore the seal. The broker was reputable. The terms were plain, a practical match. A widowed earl who required a second countess, a gentlewoman of good character who required a secure position. No one had pretended it was love. She had specifically not pretended it was love. She had £25 left in her purse, 1 cracked hat box, 2 trunks, a bundle of music sheets she had refused to leave behind, and biscuit, 12 pounds of cream-coloured terrier who had been barking at the frosted window for the last 20 minutes, as if the snow had personally offended him. She was not going to be romantic about this. She was here to secure a future, that was all. But when the carriage turned through the iron gates, and the full length of Ashbridge Hall came into view, its towers rising grey and grand against the white sky, something in her chest pulled tight, and would not let go. It was not fear, not exactly. It was the recognition of a place that had once been magnificent, and had become something else. She straightened her spine, shifted the dog to her other arm, and reminded herself that she was not here to feel things. She was here to secure a future. Those were entirely different projects. The carriage drew up. A footman opened the door. Cordelia stepped down onto the gravel, holding Biscuit to her chest, and the cold air hit her like a slap. The front doors were already open. Mrs. Holloway stood in the doorway, her face a careful arrangement of professional courtesy, barely covering considerable surprise. 3 footmen had appeared along the steps. A young maid had crept to the edge of the entrance hall and stopped there, staring. And then, in the upper doorway, past Mrs. Holloway, he appeared, and every other thought went straight out of Cordelia's head. He was tall, he was dark. He was dressed in morning black, from his coat to his boots, and he came down the marble steps with the deliberate ease of a man who had never once considered that the world might fail to arrange itself around him. His face. She had not expected that face. She had expected old, or cold, or both. He was neither. He was 35. And the lines at the corners of his eyes and the hard set of his jaw told her he had lived those years with a terrible intensity. He was the most controlled human being she had ever seen. And the word that came to her, uninvited and inconvenient, was not cold, was grieving. There was a difference. He reached the bottom step and stopped. His gaze moved over her. The 2 trunks, the cracked hat box, the dog, who chose that exact moment to bark with considerable authority. And then to her, he looked at her a moment longer than politeness allowed. Then his eyes went to the letter, Mrs. Holloway held out toward him. He took it. He read it. His face did not change, but something in his eyes went flat and cold and dangerous, Miss Ashford. His voice was exactly what she had expected. Low, even, precise, your lordship. And she began her curtsy. Later she would blame the ice. It was there across the marble, transparent, invisible, waiting with the patience of a trap that had been set long ago. Her boot found it at the exact moment her weight shifted forward. Her heel went sideways. Her arms flew out. The hat box struck the footman beside her, sent his tray of calling cards into the air like startled birds. Her reticule, the clasp of which had been failing since Harrogate, burst open and scattered its contents across the snow-dusted stone. Biscuit launched free and hit the ground running. Her bonnet tipped forward over one eye, and then she went down, not gracefully, not quickly, but in a long, terrible, slow slide across the icy marble. That gave everyone present ample time to watch it happen. She landed at the Earl's boots, pale blue skirts and dignity gone together. Biscuit barked once in her general direction, as if to note that this was, in his estimation, a national emergency. The footman stood frozen. The young maid had both hands over her mouth. Mrs. Holloway's professional face had been entirely overtaken by something that was either horror or laughter. And Mr. Pruett, who had been butler at Ashbridge for 22 years, and had seen everything, had gone the colour of chalk. Lucian, standing to the left of the door, where he had been watching with the expression of a man who has set a fire and is now wondering whether he can blame the candle, pressed both hands hard over his mouth. And Aldous Greaves, Earl of Ashbridge, the man who had not smiled in 7 years. Not at Christmas, not at weddings, not when his tenants praised him, not when Parliament honoured him, not when his brother had tried every joke and trick and gentle provocation a loving brother had to offer. Locked. Not a polite laugh, not the controlled exhale that passed for amusement in drawing rooms. A real laugh, full, unguarded, helpless, that came up from somewhere deep and startled, and did not quite know how to stop. Because it had not been let out in so long it had forgotten the way, the whole household froze. Because none of them, not Pruett, not Mrs. Holloway, not the maid, not a single footman, had heard that sound in 7 years. Aldous stopped himself. He pressed his lips together. He composed himself with visible effort. The way a man picks up a mask he has dropped in public, and he reached down and offered his gloved hand to the woman at his feet. Cordelia took it. She stood. She adjusted her bonnet with one hand and retrieved her dignity with the other, which was considerably harder to find. And she looked up at him. His face was composed again, but she had seen it. She had seen the crack, the half-second of unguarded life, and something in her did a complicated thing that she refused to name. Miss Ashford, he said. Controlled once more. Whatever brought you here was not written by my hand. She felt the hope she had carried through 3 hours of frozen roads begin to crumble. She lifted her chin. I see. You will be returned to London by morning. The carriage will. I cannot return to London, your lordship. He paused. There is no London left for me. The silence that followed was of an entirely different quality from the one before she came. He looked at her. Really looked. The way a man studies a thing he has not decided what to do with. And for one moment, the Earl of Ashbridge was not composed at all. Then the mask returned. Smooth, complete. Come inside, he said. The drawing room was large and cold and almost beautiful. Almost. Because beauty needs a little warmth to finish itself, and this room had not been properly warmed in years. The fire in the grate was small and decorative rather than generous. The curtains had been drawn back, but the light through the tall windows was thin and grey. The furniture was fine. Deep green brocade chairs, a rosewood writing table, a Turkish rug worn soft with age. But it had the particular air of a room that was maintained without being used. Cordelia sat in one of the green chairs with a blanket Mrs. Holloway had produced without being asked. Because Mrs. Holloway was the sort of woman who solved what she could solve and reserved judgment on everything else. Biscuit had been removed, protesting, to the kitchen, by a nervous young footman named Edwin, who had been told that the creature was a guest and was to be treated accordingly. Aldous stood by the fire. He had not sat down. He watched her with the steady, unreadable attention of a man who was good at reading things, and did not intend to show it. Tell me how this arrangement came about. So she told him. She was precise, and she was honest, because she had decided, somewhere on the road from Harrogate, that if she was going to be here at all, she was going to be here honestly. She told him about the broker, the letter, the Ashbridge seals, and she watched his face as she spoke, and she saw the moment he understood who was responsible. A muscle moved in his jaw. "And your previous situation," he said. "You said there was no London left for you." She looked at her hands. Then she looked up. "I was companion and music tutor in the household of Lord Crispin Hale." "For 14 months, she said the name plainly. "The way you say a thing that hurt you enormously, and which you have since decided to carry as a fact rather than a wound." Lord Hale made advances of a dishonourable nature. I refused him. He dismissed me without a character, and he wrote to several families with whom I might otherwise have found work. To make sure I would not. Aldous was very still. "No reputable household in London will take me without a reference," she said. "I have no family. I have £25 and a dog. The arrangement in your letter, the letter I believed was yours, it offered safety and dignity. I did not come for wealth, your lordship. I did not come for romance. I came because it was the last door that appeared to be open." Inside Aldous, something moved that he had not expected. Not pity. He was honest enough with himself to know the difference between pity and the cold, clean anger that rose in him when he pictured a powerful man quietly destroying a woman's life because she had refused to be commanded. The anger was real. He did not show it. "You are not my bride," he said. "You are not my betrothed. This arrangement was entered into through a deception I intend to address directly. You are a guest, brought here under false pretenses. And for that I owe you an apology." She looked at him steadily. "That is unexpectedly gracious of you, your lordship. You may remain. Temporarily, while I make arrangements. But I want no confusion about what that means. There will be no marriage, no attachment, no future of that kind between us, I understand." Her voice was very quiet. "I have been unwanted before. I recognize the shape of it." The line landed like something thrown carefully at a very specific target. Aldous looked away, toward the fire, and said nothing for several seconds, because he knew that shape too. From the inside, he had worn it like a second coat. "For 7 years I will speak to my brother," he said. He found Lucian in the library. His brother had positioned himself by the window, a glass of brandy in his hand, the expression of a man waiting for an execution, and meeting it with what composure he could. Aldous came through the door and closed it. "You used my seal, yes. You forged my name to a marriage broker, yes. You arranged for a woman to travel 3 hours through a snowstorm, to a house she believed had sent for her. Yes." Lucian set down his glass. "I did all of those things, Aldous, and I knew they were wrong when I did them. And I did them anyway." "Then explain yourself." Lucian looked at his brother. Really looked. The way he looked when he was not performing ease. "But actually paying attention. You have been dying for 7 years, he said. Aldous's face did not change. Not quickly. Just steadily. "A little less of you each winter. A little more of the ledgers. A little less of everything that is not duty. I watched you stop laughing. Stop dancing. Stop caring whether the fire in your own study was lit. I watched you put Rosalind's portrait under a veil, and then disappear behind one of your own. The stillness in Aldous became a different kind of stillness. I did it because I am afraid of losing you," Lucian said. "Every proper, polite, appropriate thing I have tried has failed. You call this loyalty, Aldous. I call it burial. Rosalind died once. Must you die every day after her?" The words hit the room like stones dropped into still water. Aldous turned toward the bookshelves, his back to his brother, his hand resting on the spine of a book he was not seeing. "You will not interfere again," he said, his voice controlled to the point of breaking. "Do you understand me? She stays until I have arranged for her return. That is all." Lucian said nothing, but he remembered the laugh, and he thought, "Perhaps one crack is enough. If it is the right crack." He said none of this aloud. "Some things find their own way, if you let them." That evening, after supper, Aldous went upstairs. He did not quite decide to go. His feet knew the way without him directing them. They had always known the way. They had taken him there 100 times, in the private hours of the night, when the house was quiet and the weight of everything became, briefly, unbearable. He stood outside the nursery door. The key was on its hook, 6 inches from his left hand. He did not reach for it. He had not reached for it in 7 years. He did not reach for it now. He simply stood, in the way he had learned to simply stand, which was not quite enduring, and not quite healing, and was perhaps a thing without a proper name. And then a soft sound in the corridor behind him. He turned. Cordelia Ashford was standing 10 feet away, holding a small candle, clearly lost. There were nearly 30 rooms on the upper floors of Ashbridge Hall, and the wings were not easy to tell apart in the dark. She saw him. She stopped. She saw the door he stood beside, the locked keyhole, his face. She did not ask. She simply moved to the far side of the corridor, away from the nursery, and she sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, her candle placed beside her, and she stayed there. Aldous looked at her. She did not look at him. She looked at the candle flame, which was a polite direction to look. When a man is standing outside a locked door at 11 o'clock at night, not crying, but not crying either, he did not tell her to go to bed. He stood there a little longer, and then, with considerable reluctance, he sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite wall, and the corridor was quiet between them, in a way that was different from the rest of the house. Less like a chapel, more like the last room before dawn. After a long time, he said. This house was not always like this. She kept her eyes on the candle. No house is born silent, your lordship. He did not answer, but something in him eased, almost imperceptibly, the way a knot loosens. When you stop pulling at it, he did not know it yet. But the man who had not wanted anything in 7 years had just spent an hour on a cold floor, wanting only for her to stay exactly where she was. And that was the most dangerous thing that had happened to him since the night the nursery door was locked. He stood. He bid her good night, his voice rough at the edges, and he walked back to his rooms thinking about a thing he had no business thinking about, which was the sound of her voice in the dark. No house is born silent. He lay awake until the candle in his memory finally burned down. 3 mornings later, the trouble began. Though he did not know it yet, it began with the ledgers. Cordelia had asked Mrs. Holloway, in the most matter-of-fact tone she could manage, whether there was anything useful she might do to earn her keep while she remained. Mrs. Holloway, a woman of practical rather than sentimental nature, had studied her a moment and then assigned her 3 tasks: the flowers in the entrance hall, the music sheets in the morning room, and the household correspondence that had piled up during Mrs. Holloway's recent illness. It was the correspondence that did it, because among the letters and receipts and tenant accounts, Cordelia found a column of figures that did not sit right. She had a good head for numbers. She had managed a poor household on almost nothing for 2 years. She knew what money looked like when it was honest, and she knew what it looked like when it was not. There were withdrawals, quiet ones, spread across 3 years, drawn against an agricultural account tied to the North Fields, small enough each one to escape a busy man's notice. But together they were not small at all, and the signature authorizing them. The signature was the Earl's, except it was wrong. She had spent her life with handwriting, with music, which is its own kind of handwriting, and she knew the shape of a thing that had been copied rather than written. There was a hesitation in the loops, a care that real handwriting never has. A man signing his own name does not pause to get it right. A forger does. She sat very still with the page in her hands, and she thought of the letter that had brought her here, the one with the seal, the one in a hand that was not quite the Earl's, and the 2 thoughts touched, and a chill walked the length of her spine. She did not yet know who, she did not yet know why, but she knew this. Someone had been stealing from Ashbridge Hall for 3 years, and someone had forged the Earl's name to do it, and the same careful, copying hand was on both pages. She set the ledger down. She looked toward the door of the study, where the most powerful man in the county sat alone, grieving a wife and a child, with no idea that the ground beneath his name had been quietly hollowed out, and Cordelia Ashford, 25 years old, £25 to her name, a guest who had been told plainly there was no future for her here, decided she was not going to tell him, not yet, not until she knew whose hand it was, because a woman with nothing learns one thing very well. You do not accuse a man in his own house until you can prove it. She gathered the rest of the letters. She arranged her face, and she went to find the flowers. And in the entrance hall, reaching to set white roses in a tall vase, she stepped backward into the suit of armor that stood in its alcove. It rang out like a bell. The whole hall echoed with it. She turned, looked at the armor, and said, in a perfectly calm voice, "My apologies." Mr. Pruitt appeared from the corridor at the sound, his expression a study in absolute serenity. "The armor, I assure you, has sustained worse. Miss Ashford, I do hope you are not required to report this." "The household accident ledger," Pruitt said, with the gravity of a man announcing a treaty, "has not been opened in 7 years. I shall endeavor to keep it closed." And somewhere down the corridor, a footman made a sound that was almost a laugh, a warmth that crept into the entrance hall that was not entirely from the fire. The fire Mrs. Holloway had ordered lit on a Wednesday, which had not happened in years. Aldous watched it from the doorway of his study. He told himself he was monitoring a situation. a woman he had not invited, for whom he was responsible until she could be safely sent on. He told himself his awareness of her movements through the house was practical, not personal. He watched her thank Edwin for bringing the dog back. He watched her take Biscuit's ridiculous little face between her hands and speak to it in a low, earnest voice, as if the creature understood every word, which, he noted, it appeared to. He watched her apologize to a suit of armor, and he turned away from the corridor window and went back to his desk and wrote 2 letters and answered 3, and reviewed a drainage report, and was almost completely successful in not thinking about Cordelia Ashford for the rest of the afternoon. Almost. That night, a carriage came up the long approach. Lamps swinging in the dark, Muster Pruett brought the card to the study on a silver tray. Aldous read the name, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. Lady Honoria Vane, 42 years old, beautiful in the way that very elegant women are beautiful. Everything arranged to effect, nothing accidental, nothing unguarded. She had decided 3 years ago that she would become the next Countess of Ashbridge. Not soon, not without patience, but inevitably. She had identified Aldous as the logical end of her widowhood, and she had waited and positioned herself, and understood that a man of his grief required time. She had given him time. She had not been informed that a woman named Cordelia Ashford would arrive in a hired carriage, with a cracked hatbox and a barking terrier, and take up residence in his house, while the servants began lighting fires in rooms that had been cold for 7 years. That news had reached her through 3 separate letters within a week. She was, to say the least, interested. She came the next morning, at the correct hour, in a gown the color of deep wine. She accepted tea. She spoke to Aldous of the Winter Relief Ball, the charity event the estate had always hosted for the tenants, the one that had not been held since Rosalind died. There was, she suggested, some question of reviving it, given the brutal winter, the genuine need on the North Fields, and she, naturally, was the right person to organize it. She raised the matter with elegant purpose, and watched his face while she spoke. She was watching it when Cordelia came through the drawing-room door, Biscuit under one arm, a stack of correspondence under the other. Having clearly taken a wrong turn from the morning room, Cordelia stopped in the doorway. Lady Honoria turned and smiled. "Oh," she said, "you must be the guest," that one word. That particular pause before it. Anyone who had spent an hour in society would have heard exactly what it was doing. Cordelia heard it. She tilted her chin. "Lady Vane, I apologize for the interruption." She turned to Aldous. "I will leave these on the hall table, your lordship," and she began to back out, with as much dignity as a woman can manage while holding a dog that had decided, at this precise moment, to growl at Lady Honoria, with the concentrated intensity of a far larger animal. But Lady Honoria's eyes had already moved, past the dog, past the dignity, to the stack of correspondence under Cordelia's arm, and to the ledger that sat on top of it, the agricultural ledger. For the Northfields, and for just a moment, so brief that no one in the room caught it, something flickered across Lady Honoria Vane's beautiful, composed face. It was not jealousy, it was alarm, because Lady Honoria knew exactly whose hand was in that ledger, and she had not expected anyone, least of all a penniless music tutor with a barking dog, to ever be reading it. She set down her tea. She smiled again. "Smooth and complete. How charming," she said. "Do stay. I should so like to know you better." And Cordelia, who heard the second thing in that voice, the thing underneath the first thing, felt the chill again, and understood, without yet understanding how, that she had just made an enemy, and that the enemy already knew something Cordelia herself had only begun to guess. The days that followed had a strange quality, the quality of a house that has decided to change before anyone living in it has agreed to say so. The fires were lit more often. Officially, this was Mrs. Holloway's doing. She told Pruett the cold had been getting into the east wing, that it was simply a matter of proper management. Pruett said nothing to contradict her. The servants said nothing either. They all understood, in the way that servants understand everything, that the fires had rather more to do with the pale young woman in the blue travelling gown than with the east wing guest rooms. Cordelia had asked, on her 3rd morning, whether the curtains in the morning room might be opened. Even grief, she had said to Mrs. Holloway, with a matter-of-fact lightness that was either very brave or very unaware of itself, should not be allowed to mildew the draperies. Mrs. Holloway had looked at her a long moment, and then she had opened the curtains, the room filled with winter light, white, cold, sharp, but real, the kind of light that wakes a thing up rather than preserving it. The curtains stayed open by the end of that week. Several others had opened too. Not because anyone ordered it, but because the habit of darkness loses its grip when light gets near enough to show the contrast. Aldous noticed. He noticed everything now. Which was the problem? He found her in the library on a Tuesday. She had climbed onto a reading stool to reach a volume on the upper shelf. A collection of Scarlatti sonatas, which had no business being on the upper shelf, except that someone years ago had decided to put the music as far out of reach as possible. She was on her toes, fingers just short of the spine. When the stool rocked, he crossed the room in 3 strides. His hands caught her at the waist an instant before the stool went sideways. She came back against him with a soft impact, her back against his chest, his arms around her. For exactly the fraction of a second it took to set her on solid ground, and in that fraction of a second, he was aware of the warmth of her through the wool, the faint scent of rosewater in her hair, the way her breath caught, not with fear, with something else, something startled and awake. He released her immediately. The space between them returned. She turned to face him. Her cheeks flushed with something that was not cold. Must you make war upon every elevated surface in this house? She was assembling her composure piece by piece. With the diligent speed of a woman who had a great deal of practice. Only the ones that challenge me first, your lordship. He almost said something. He chose not to. He took the Scarlatti down himself, handed it to her, and left the library without looking back, because looking back would have meant admitting something he was not ready to name. In the corridor, he stopped. He stood with his hand pressed flat against the wall, and his heart was doing something irregular, something that had not happened in a very long time, something he found extremely inconvenient. Stop it, he told himself. She is a guest, a temporary guest. You will arrange her future and she will go and the house will be quiet again, as it should be. The words tasted like ash, but the real trouble was already in the house, and it had nothing to do with his heart. It had to do with the ledger. Cordelia had not stopped looking. She had told no one. She had simply kept reading, in the quiet hours, with the household correspondence as her cover, and she had built, page by careful page, a picture she did not want to believe. The withdrawals went back 3 years, each one drawn against the Northfields account, each one authorized by a signature that was almost the Earl's, and was not. And then she found the contract folded into the back of the agricultural file, an agreement for the supply of seed and drainage labor across the Northfields, signed by Ashbridge and countersigned by a supplier. The supplier was a company she did not recognize, but the Ashbridge signature on the contract was not the forged one. It was real. She knew it was real because it had the carelessness real handwriting has, the little impatience. A man signing without pausing to get it right, except it was not the Earl's hand at all. It was lighter, quicker, the hand of a younger man. And at the very bottom of the page, in a witness line, she found a name she had heard before, a company agent acting on behalf of Lord Crispin Hale. She sat in the cold library with the contract in her lap, and the pieces moved into place, slowly. Then all at once, the forged signatures draining the account. The real signature on a fraudulent contract signed not by the Earl, but by his brother and Lord Hale's name. Underneath all of it, she closed her eyes. She had thought she came here to escape that man, and he had been here, in the paper, in the walls, the whole time. She put the papers back exactly as she had found them, and she went looking for the brother. She found Lucian in the conservatory, among the dead winter ferns. He had a glass in his hand again. He had a glass in his hand most evenings now, Lord Lucian. He turned. Summoned a smile, Miss Ashford. You have the look of a woman with a question. I have the look of a woman with several. She did not sit. 3 years ago. Did you sign a supply contract for the Northfields? On your brother's behalf. The smile fell off his face. It just fell. How do you? Did you read it before you signed it? Silence. You did not, she said. He stopped. He set the glass down very carefully, as if it might shatter from the weight of what he was about to say. I was managing things, while Aldous was lost. The estate could not simply stop. Someone had to sign. Hale's man came with the contract. Hale was a family acquaintance. It seemed harmless, yes, and then it was not. Lucian looked at her, and in his face she saw the thing she had not expected. Not a schemer, not a thief. A frightened man. He owns me, Lucian said. Quietly. Crispin Hale owns me. There were clauses in that contract I did not read. Penalty clauses. Authorizations I did not understand. He has been drawing money against the estate for 3 years, with my signature giving him the right to do it. and every time I have tried to stop him, he reminds me that if it comes out, it will not look like he stole from us. He drew a breath. It will look like I did. The conservatory was very cold. The dead ferns rattled in a draught. And there is more, Lucien said, and his voice dropped lower still. He has written to me this week. He knows you are here, and he knows you have been reading the ledgers. Cordelia went rigid. How could he possibly? Lady Honoria Vane, Lucien said, and the name landed in the room like a stone. They are not strangers, Miss Ashford. They have been acquainted for some years. Hale needs money. Honoria needs a title and an estate. They have an arrangement. He keeps the estate quietly bleeding. She marries my brother and inherits what is left, and neither of them ever expected a music tutor with a head for numbers to walk into the middle of it. So that was it. That was the look on Honoria's beautiful face in the drawing room when she saw the ledger. Not jealousy. Alarm. You have to tell Aldous, Cordelia said. Lucien laughed, a terrible, broken little laugh. Tell him what? That I ruined us. That I have spent 7 years pretending to protect him while quietly handing his estate to the man who... He stopped. If I tell him, I destroy the last thing between us. He will never forgive me, and he should not. He will forgive you, Cordelia said. He is not the man you are afraid of. He is the man under that, but she was not sure she believed it. And neither was Lucien. Lord Crispin Hale arrived on Friday afternoon. He came in the correct manner, card sent ahead. Visit at the proper hour, and he was everything Cordelia remembered. And nothing she had missed. Tall, fair, beautifully put together, with the easy manners of a man who has never been told no. Twice, he greeted Aldous with exactly the right respect, and he greeted Cordelia with the particular familiarity of a man asserting ownership of a history. Miss Ashford, his eyes moved over her in the way that had always made her feel like a ledger entry being audited. How remarkably well you look. Country air becomes you. Thank you, Lord Hale. Tea was brought, and the conversation in the drawing room was a masterpiece of cruelty disguised as concern. Hale was an artist of the oblique. The wound dressed as worry. The insult wrapped in charity. He spoke of Cordelia's unfortunate situation when she left his household, with such apparent sympathy that anyone who did not know him might have believed it. Aldous knew him within 6 minutes. He sat very still, the way he sat when something had made him genuinely angry. The control became tighter, not looser, which Cordelia was learning was the dangerous version of him. Hale reached for his second cup, and his elbow caught Cordelia's and sent it tipping toward the edge of the table. She caught it, mostly, but the tea splashed across the cloth and onto Hale's trouser leg. And he made the sound men make when they are trying not to show that they are furious with the person they have decided to blame. He looked at her. Just a look. The kind that needs no words, and Aldous's voice entered the room like a cold current. Be careful, Hale. The room went quiet. That cup has shown better manners than you. Hale turned to look at him, and Aldous looked back, entirely composed, absolutely implacable. And Hale, who was clever enough to read the difference between a man who was disengaged and a man who had decided to pay attention, left within the hour, but at the door. As his carriage was brought round, he paused, and he said, in a voice pitched low enough for only Aldous to hear, You have a great deal of faith in that young woman, Ashbridge. I would be careful where I placed it. People who go reading other men's accounts often find their own do not bear reading. And he was gone, before Aldous could answer, leaving the words hanging like smoke. That night, Aldous could not settle. People who go reading other men's accounts. He told himself it was nothing. A bully's parting shot, except it was not nothing. Because Hale had said accounts. And there was no reason on earth for Hale to know what Cordelia had been doing in the morning room with the household correspondence, unless someone had told him. Aldous sat in his study with the fire burning low. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt the floor of his own life shift. Just slightly, just enough to notice that it was not where he had assumed it to be. He did not go to the ledgers, not yet, because some part of him, the part that had survived by controlling everything, did not want to know. He went upstairs instead, to the corridor, to the locked door. And she was there, not by his door this time, sitting on the floor of the corridor, a single candle beside her, as if she had known he would come, as if this had become, without either of them deciding it, a thing they did. He sat down across from her. The candle burned between them. You are troubled, she said. Not a question, Hale said something to me. At the door, she went very still. He said I should be careful where I place my faith. He said that people who read other men's accounts often find their own do not bear reading, The candle flame trembled, and Cordelia made a choice, not the safe one. The honest one. Then I think it is time I told you, she said, what I have found in your ledgers. So she told him. All of it. The forged withdrawals, the 3 years. The signature that was almost his and was not. And then, with her voice steady, and her hands folded so he would not see them shake, the contract. The real signature. His brother's hand, Lord Hale's name beneath it. Aldous did not move. He sat on the cold floor of the corridor outside his dead son's nursery. And he listened to a woman he had known for 2 weeks tell him that his brother had quietly handed his life's estate to his enemy, and that the enemy had been bleeding him for 3 years. With Lucien's frightened, foolish signature giving him the right. When she finished, the silence was enormous. He did not steal it, Cordelia said softly. He signed something he did not read, because he was trying to hold everything together. While I was already dead, she did not deny it. Aldous stood. He walked to the window at the end of the corridor, and he looked out at the dark fields. The fields that did not, in any way that mattered anymore, belong entirely to him. And the thing that rose in him was not what Cordelia expected. It was not rage at Lucian. It was shame. I left him alone, Aldous said to the window. He was 22. He buried a sister-in-law and a nephew, and he watched his brother turn to stone. And there was no one to manage the estate. So he managed it, alone. And he made a young man's mistake. And a wolf was waiting for exactly that. He turned. I did this, he said. Not the signature, the silence. I built the empty house this happened in. Cordelia rose to her feet. You can still. There is a thing you do not understand yet, Aldous said. And his voice was terrible in its quietness. If I expose Hale, he exposes the contract. And the contract is signed in Lucian's hand. There is no version of this where I save my estate without ruining my brother. Hale built it that way. The truth that frees me destroys the only family I have left. The corridor was very cold. And there is a second thing, he said. He knows you read the ledgers. Which means you are no longer a music tutor he wronged once and forgot. You are a witness, a threat. And men like Hale do not leave threats standing. She lifted her chin. I am not afraid of him, you should be. I have been afraid of him before, she said. I learned something. The fear does not protect you. It only makes you small. I would rather be in danger standing up than safe on my knees. And Aldous looked at her. This woman with 25 pounds and a dog, and nothing in the world to protect her. Telling him, the Earl of Ashbridge, that she would rather stand than kneel, and something in him that had been frozen for 7 years cracked a little wider. Go to bed, Cordelia, he said. Her name. Without the title, without the distance, she heard it. He saw her hear it. Good night, Aldous, she said, and she gave him back his name, like a gift, and she went. He did not sleep. The next morning, he sent for his brother. Lucian came into the study with the walk of a man going to the gallows. He had seen Hale's carriage leave the day before. He had heard through Edwin, through Mrs. Holloway, the temperature of the house change. He knew. You know, Aldous said. I know that you know, Lucian said then. Because he was, underneath the charm, a man who had carried this alone for 3 years. Lucian Greaves broke. I am so sorry, he said, and his voice cracked clean in half. I tried to fix it 100 times. I tried to pay it back quietly. I tried to find a clause, a way out. And every time I got close, he tightened the rope. And I could not tell you. Because telling you meant admitting that I had done the one thing I swore I would never do. I lost a piece of what father left us. I lost it to a man who, Lucian, and I forged your name on a marriage broker's letter on top of all of it. Because I thought if I could just get you to live again, then maybe it would matter less that I, Lucian. His brother stopped. Aldous crossed the room. And he did not strike him. He did not rage. He did not say a single one of the cold, cutting things that the Earl of Ashbridge was so very good at saying. He put his hand on his brother's shoulder. You were a boy, Aldous said, and I left you alone with all of it. The grief was mine. And I made you carry the house on top of it. What Hale did, Hale did. What you did because I was not here. The fault that began this was mine. Lucian stared at him, as if his brother had spoken in a language he had forgotten existed. You are not angry, he whispered. I am furious, Aldous said. I have simply decided where to aim it, and for the first time in 7 years, the 2 Greaves brothers stood in the same room, on the same side, of the same fight. But the fight was not yet winnable, and they both knew it because the contract was real, and Lucian's hand was on it, and there was no clean way through, until Cordelia found the thing that changed everything. She had gone back to the contract. One more time. She told herself she was checking the dates. She was not checking the dates. She was doing the thing she always did, the thing that had ruined her in Hale's house, and might ruin her here. She could not leave a wrong sum alone. And this time she did not look at the signatures. She looked at the witness line, the agent who had signed for Hale's company, the flourish at the end of his name, the long, careful, copied loops. And she went very, very still, because she had seen that hand before. She had seen it on the letter that brought her to Ashbridge Hall, the forged seal, the invitation in a hand that was almost the Earl's and was not. The same hesitation, the same patient, dishonest care, the same forger had written both. Which meant the man who forged the withdrawals from the estate account and the man who forged the letter that lured her here were one man, Hale's agent. Which meant Lucian had not truly forged the letter that brought her. He had thought he had. He had taken the seal. He had given it to Mrs. Whitcomb. But somewhere in that chain, Hale's man had touched it. Hale had known she was coming before she arrived. Hale had wanted her here. Because a wronged, friendless woman in the Earl's house was a scandal he could detonate whenever it suited him. A way to humiliate Aldous, to clear the path for Honoria. To bury any question about the accounts under a much louder, much dirtier story. She had not stumbled into the middle of their plot. She was part of it. She had been a piece on the board from the moment the snow began to fall. And Cordelia understood, finally and completely, what she was to these people, a convenience. A scandal in a blue gown. A thing to be used and then discarded the moment she stopped being useful. I have been unwanted before, she had told him, that first day. She had not known the half of it. And so she made the decision that any woman who has learned the hard way makes. To protect the people she had come to care about by removing the thing that endangered them, herself, she would leave. If she was gone, the scandal lost its fuse. If she was gone, Hale lost the loud, dirty story he needed to cover the quiet, true one. If she was gone, Aldous and Lucian could fight the contract on clean ground. Without her standing in the blast, she told herself it was strategy. It was not entirely strategy. It was also the oldest reflex she had. The one that said, "You were never going to be allowed to stay, so leave before they make you." She packed in the dark. 2 trunks, a cracked hat box, a bundle of music she would not leave behind, and a small, confused dog who watched her with the betrayed expression of an animal who had finally decided that this was home. She left a note for Mrs. Holloway. She left nothing for Aldous, because there were no words that would not either lie or break her. But before she went, before the first grey light, she made one copy, by hand, in her own careful, honest writing, of the witness signature on the contract, and the signature on the letter that brought her here, side by side. So anyone could see they were the same hand. She left that, folded, on the Earl's desk, where he would find it. Her last gift, evidence, so that even with her gone, he would have the truth. And then she took the dog, and the trunks, and the hat box, and she went out into the snow. She got as far as the entrance hall, as far as the suit of armor she had apologized to, as far as the white roses, still beautiful in the cold, and the front doors opened, and Aldous Greaves was standing there, in the freezing dark, without a coat, his chest rising and falling like a man who had run, because Mrs. Holloway had not waited until morning, because Mrs. Holloway, who solved what she could solve, had read the note and gone straight to his door. "You are leaving," he said. "I am protecting you." Her breath fogged in the cold hall. "If I am gone, he has nothing, no scandal, no story. You and Lucian can fight him clean. You think I will let you walk into the snow, with £25, and to protect me? It is not your decision." "No," he agreed. "It is yours. And you are making the wrong one. Aldous, you said you would rather stand than kneel." His voice broke on it. "And now you are running, which is the same thing." "It is kneeling with your feet moving." She had no answer for that. "Stay," he said. "Not as a convenience, not as a guest, not as a thing to be sent away when it is safe. Stay and fight him with us in the open, where everyone can see, and the contract. Lucian's name, your estate? You found the answer this morning," he said, and he held up the paper she had left on his desk, the 2 signatures, side by side, the same forging hand. "You handed it to me as a goodbye. I am going to use it as a beginning." Snow blew in through the open doors, and Cordelia Ashford, who had spent her whole life leaving before she could be left, set down the cracked hat box. "There is a thing you should know," she said. "Before I agree to stand in front of an enemy who has already used me once and will not hesitate to do it again, anything, Lady Honoria intends to ruin me, publicly, where it cannot be undone. And there is only one place in this entire county loud enough and full enough and cruel enough to do it properly." Aldous understood before she said it. His face went very still. The ball, he said. They will revive it, Cordelia said. You will organize it, and she will make sure I am there, in front of all of them. And then she will let Hale tell the room exactly who I am. A dismissed companion, a schemer in a hired carriage, a woman who fell at your feet and into your house. And by the time the music stops, there will be no version of me that anyone in this county will ever believe. The snow settled on the marble between them. Then we opened the ballroom, Aldous said, quietly. The way a man says a thing he has sworn for 7 years he would never do, Aldous. That room was hers. Yes, he said, it was Rosalind's room, the brightest room in this house, and it has been dark for 7 years, and I have let it stay dark because opening it felt like betrayal. He looked at her, and his eyes were not cold. They were not composed. They were, for once, completely his own. But I am beginning to think the betrayal was the darkness, not the light. He held out his hand across the snow, across the cold marble, across 7 years. Come back inside, he said. We have a ball to plan, and a war to win, and Cordelia Ashford, who had learned never to trust a powerful man's promise, took his hand. And in a great house across the county, Lady Honoria Vane sat at her writing desk, and began to address the invitations, in her own elegant hand, smiling. She did not yet know that the music tutor had stopped running. She did not yet know that the brothers were no longer divided. She did not yet know that somewhere in Ashbridge Hall, a man who had been dead for 7 years had just decided to live. She would find out. At the ball. Ashbridge Hall had not opened its ballroom in 7 years. The servants who remembered it as Rosalind's room. Not because she had owned it, but because she had made it feel alive. She had chosen the arrangement of the chandeliers, the pattern of the floor polish, the flowers that always stood at the entrance. She had danced there, she had laughed there, and the room had laughed back. Opening it now was a complicated act. It took 3 days to clean. The dust sheets came down from the chandeliers, and underneath the crystal still caught the light perfectly, as if it had been waiting. The floor was polished until it reflected the candles like still water. The musicians' gallery was unlocked and aired, and the long locked doors stood open to the cold corridor for the first time since the night everything broke. Cordelia helped where she could. She folded place cards, she sorted the seating, she carried flowers, and she knocked one vase clean off a side table and caught it an inch from the floor. And looked up to find Aldous watching from the doorway with an expression he would have called supervisory. It was not supervisory, because the man had not stopped watching her since the night in the snow. The flowers were white. Cordelia had suggested white, carefully, to Mrs. Holloway, who had paused and then nodded and said nothing. But that evening Mrs. Holloway had gone to her sitting room and cried very quietly, and denied it when asked, which was, in that house, the correct response to almost everything. They had a plan. It was not a comfortable plan. It was the kind of plan you make when you have one chance and no margin and an enemy who has been winning for 3 years. Aldous would let them come. That was the hardest part. He would let Honoria spread her poison. He would let Hale stand up in the room and tell the worst version of Cordelia's life. He would let them think they had won, right up until the moment they had committed to it in front of every important person in the county. And then he would turn it over. All of it. At once. Because a trap only works if the people in it believe they are the ones who set it. You understand what I am asking? He had said to her the night before, by the fire. I am asking you to stand in a room and let people you despise say cruel things about you. And do nothing. For longer than you will think you can bear. I have stood in rooms like that before, she said. Not like this. No, she agreed. Before, I had no one standing with me. She looked at him. This time I do. That changes everything about how long I can bear it. And he had no answer for that, except the one he did not yet have the courage to say out loud. The evening of the ball, she came down the stairs, in pale blue silk, silver embroidery at the hem and the cuffs. Her hair pinned with 2 small pearl clips. And she was not beautiful in the way the ballroom would be full of. The fashion plate way, the arranged way. She was beautiful in the way a thing is beautiful when it has stopped trying to be anything other than itself. Aldous saw her from the landing. He came down the stairs. He stopped in front of her. He had prepared something to say, something appropriate, something that acknowledged the evening without acknowledging the rest of it. He said, "You look," and then he stopped. She waited. Like someone pretending she belongs, she offered, her voice light, her eyes not. He looked at her a long moment, like someone this house has been waiting for. The color that came to her face was not embarrassment. Or not only embarrassment. She turned away before he could see the rest of it. They went into the ballroom together, the room filled. The county's society arrived in carriages and cold air and silk and judgment, and Ashbridge Hall received them with the gracious formality it did everything. The candles blazed. The crystal threw light across 200 faces. All of them turned, at one point or another, toward the man at the center of the room. Because the whole county had come for one reason, not the charity, not the music. They had come to see the Earl of Ashbridge, who had not been seen in 7 years. He moved through them with the controlled ease of a man who had navigated these waters since boyhood. Lucian worked the room with his old warmth, deflecting, smoothing, watching the doors, with the skill of a man who has spent years protecting his brother from society's appetite. Except tonight he was not only protecting, tonight he was waiting. For the signal, Cordelia stood near the supper room, a glass of champagne held in both hands, and she watched everything with clear, steady eyes. She knew what was coming, not the exact shape of it. But she had been in enough rooms like this to feel the current in the air. The way you feel a storm before the first drop falls. Honoria was there. Glacial, perfect, in a gown the color of moonlight. She had organized this ball. Every flower not chosen by Cordelia. Every candle, every guest on every list. This was her stage. She had built it, and she intended to use it. And Hale was there, charming, watchful, moving through the room separately from Honoria. Which was the tell. They were not seen together, which meant they intended to be very visible, apart. It began with Honoria, because it always began with Honoria. She raised it near the supper room door. In a cluster of 3 matrons and 2 younger ladies, in a tone of perfectly calibrated concern, she spoke of the difficulty of the season, the cold, the particular vulnerability of a woman with no family, no connections, who finds herself alone in an unfamiliar household. She did not name Cordelia. She did not need to. Every eye in the group slid toward the corner where Cordelia stood, then Hale, approaching from the other side of the room. Asked directly by a man who had been primed to ask about his former companion, he answered with gentle regret. He spoke of instability, of professional difficulty, of a situation that had been complex and saddening, and the word that traveled out of that conversation, second-hand, whispered behind fans, was dismissed. And then the whispers ran through the room like water through cracks in a wall, a dismissed companion. No reference. Arrived in a hired carriage, made the Earl laugh. And someone near the orchestra said it loud enough to carry, fell at his feet and into his house. Rather convenient, wasn't it? And the room laughed. Polite, terrible, social laughter, the kind that turns on a person instead of with them. Cordelia set down her champagne. And every part of her that had been trained by a hard life screamed, "Leave. Walk to the door with your spine straight and your face still. You know this script. You have lived it before. The room has made its decision. The only dignity left is in the exit." She looked at the side door. She took 1 step toward it, and then she remembered, "This time I have someone standing with me." So she stopped. She did not leave. She turned, and she looked across the entire ballroom, past the fans, past the smiles, to the man at the center of the room. And she gave the smallest nod. Now, what happened next? The county would talk about for the rest of their lives. Aldous Greaves walked to the center of his ballroom for the first time in 7 years. And he did not walk politely. The music faltered. The musicians watched him from the gallery. The guests turned with the instinctive attention people pay to power when it moves without warning. He looked at Lord Crispin Hale, Lord Hale. His voice was the one he used in Parliament, the one built to be heard clearly. And remembered permanently, "You have spent the evening telling a story, so I will tell one too." The room went still. 3 years ago, a supply contract was signed for the north fields of this estate. Drainage, seed, labor, a reasonable arrangement on its face. It was signed by a Greaves, and countersigned by an agent acting for you. Hale's charming face did not move. But something behind it did. That contract contained clauses no honest man would bury so deep. Penalty authorizations, standing permissions to draw against the estate account. And for 3 years, quietly, patiently, sums have been withdrawn from this house. Authorized by a signature that appears to be mine, a murmur moved through the room. "It is not mine," the murmur grew. "It is a forgery," Aldous said. "A careful one. Done by the same hand that signed your agent's name to that contract. The same hand I will come to in a moment." Hale stepped forward, smooth, recovering. "Ashbridge, this is a ballroom, not a courtroom. Whatever bookkeeping trouble you have found, surely a man of your—" "I have not finished. 2 words." And Hale stopped, because the whole room was looking at him now, and he could feel the current changing direction. Aldous turned, and he looked at his brother. This was the moment, the unforgivable moment, the one Lucian had dreaded for 3 years. Because the truth that freed the estate was the truth that named Lucian. The fraudulent contract had been signed in his hand, and there was no way to expose Hale without exposing that. Hale had built it that way, and Hale was smiling now, just slightly, because he thought he saw it. He thought he had won even as he lost. He thought, expose me, and you ruin your own brother. You will not do it, no man would. Except Aldous had found the thing Hale never accounted for, because Cordelia had found it first. My brother, Aldous said to the entire room, was 22 years old when this house fell into grief. He held an estate together while I could not. And 3 years ago, an agent of Lord Hale brought him a contract, and my brother, trusting a family acquaintance, signed it. Without reading clauses that had been designed specifically to be unreadable. A gasp. Somewhere, yes, Aldous said. I am telling you, in my own ballroom, that my brother made a mistake, because I would rather speak the truth out loud myself than let this man hold it over my family for one more day. Lucian stood very straight, and his eyes were bright, and the weight of 3 years went off his shoulders in front of 200 people, like a coat falling to the floor. But here is the thing Lord Hale did not expect, Aldous said, and he held up a single folded paper. He did not expect that the forger he hired was lazy, or arrogant, or simply too clever for his own good, because that same hand, the hand that forged my signature on the withdrawals, the hand that signed the agent's name on the contract, also wrote one other document. He unfolded the paper, a letter, bearing my seal, inviting a young woman to this house. A letter I never wrote, a letter my brother believed he had arranged, but which passed, somewhere in the chain, through Lord Hale's own agent, who could not resist forging it himself. He looked up. Which means Lord Hale knew Miss Ashford was coming to Ashbridge before she ever arrived. He arranged for a wronged, friendless woman to be planted in my house, so that he could, at a time of his choosing, detonate her as a scandal, to humiliate me, to clear the way for a marriage that would deliver this bleeding estate into hands, the hands that had been bleeding it all along. The room was not breathing. The same hand wrote all 3 documents. Aldous turned the paper so the nearest guests could see. 2 signatures, side by side. The same hesitation, the same careful, dishonest loops. Any man here may examine them. The forgery is on the contract Lord Hale built. It is on the withdrawals he took, and it is on the letter he used to bring an innocent woman here as a weapon. One hand, one scheme. One man, he let it land. My brother signed a paper he should not have signed. Lord Hale built the paper, forged the rest, stole for 3 years, and tonight tried to bury all of it under the reputation of a woman whose only crime was refusing him once. In a house where she had no power and no protection, he looked at Crispin Hale. That account, Lord Hale, does not bear reading. You were right about that. You simply had the wrong owner in mind. The silence broke. Not into outrage, not yet. Into something worse for Hale, into the cold, collective turning of an entire room. The sound of 200 people deciding, all at once, which side of a thing they had always been on. Hale's face had gone grey. He opened his mouth. Be careful, Aldous said, quietly. The last time you spoke carelessly in this house, I told you a teacup had better manners. I would hate to make the comparison again, in front of witnesses. Hale left. He did not leave beautifully. He left like a man whose ground has been pulled out from under him, with every eye in the room on his back, and the doors of Ashbridge Hall closed behind him for the last time. And then Aldous turned to Lady Honoria Vane. She met his eyes, with the courage of a woman who had not quite expected this, and was deciding, very fast, how to survive it. Lady Vane, he said, I have always respected your intelligence, so I will not insult it. You knew. You have known for some time. And tonight you chose to use a woman's grief and poverty as a blade, in a room full of people, because you wanted what was left of this estate, and you were willing to destroy whoever stood between you and it. Honoria's chin lifted. You cannot prove. I do not need to, Aldous said. I only need to ask this room a question, he turned. To the 200 faces, you have all known me for 35 years. You knew my father. Some of you knew my grandfather. You have heard tonight 2 stories. One told in whispers by people with a great deal to gain, and one told plainly by me, with the papers in my hand. I ask only this. Which of us has ever had reason to lie to you? And the room answered, not with words. With its body, with the way it shifted, away from Honoria, toward Aldous, a slow, silent migration of 200 people choosing. Honoria Vane understood she had lost. She gathered the wreck of her composure and she left. Correctly. beautifully, with every appearance of ease. But her eyes, as she passed Cordelia in the doorway, were not beautiful at all, and then she was gone. And the ballroom of Ashbridge Hall stood silent, full of light, full of people, and entirely changed. Aldous walked across the floor, the crowd parted. He stopped in front of Cordelia, who was standing near the wall. Both hands pressed together, her face very still, and her eyes bright in a way that might have been tears. Or might have been something fiercer. "Miss Ashford," he said, loud enough for the room. "These people have heard a great deal tonight about who you are not. Allow me to tell them who you are." She shook her head. "Barely. Don't." He told them anyway. "This is the woman who opened the curtains in a house that had been dark for centuries, who lit fires in cold rooms, who played music in a room that had been silent since my wife died, who found, in 3 years of ledgers that no one else thought to question, the truth that saved this estate and cleared my brother's name. She did all of this as a guest, with no security, no reward, and every reason to protect only herself." He paused. "I have not smiled in 7 years," he said, and the room went very still, because this was the thing the whole county had whispered about for 7 winters. Those of you who know me know that is not an exaggeration. 7 years ago, I lost someone who mattered to me more than I knew how to say, and I spent those years in a discipline of grief so complete that the servants of this house forgot the sound of my own laughter. Nobody moved. Last month, he said, Miss Ashford arrived at my door through a deception, slipped on my icy steps, landed at my feet, in a heap of pale blue skirts, and made me laugh. For the first time since my wife died, a sound moved through the room. Soft, almost a sigh. She did not plan it. She was mortified by it. But that ridiculous, ordinary, human moment began something in this house that I have been fighting ever since. Because I believed that choosing to live again was a betrayal of the dead. He looked at Cordelia. I no longer believe that, and I will not stand in this ballroom, the room my wife loved, and watch a woman of courage and kindness be reduced to a rumor. Because she made powerful people uncomfortable by refusing them, he held out his hand. I believe they are about to resume the music. Will you dance with me? She looked at him. You are certain, she said, not a question. A check. I have been certain for some time, he said. I have simply been the last to admit it. She took his hand, the music resumed, and they danced. Not well, because the truth was that Aldous had not danced in 7 years, and it showed. And the truth was that Cordelia was not the most coordinated woman in England, and at one point she stepped squarely on his foot and whispered an apology, and he whispered back that it was entirely fine. And she whispered that she was going to improve, and he whispered that he was not certain he wanted her to. And she laughed, a real laugh, and he thought it was possibly the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in that room, and he thought it in full awareness of what that meant. And without flinching from it, afterward, in the side corridor where the guests did not go, she stopped walking and turned to face him. Don't do this, for honor, she said. Don't keep me because it was the right thing. I have had enough men do the right thing on my behalf while wanting nothing to do with me. I defended you, he said, because I love you. The words were simple. He had never until that moment said them aloud. He had expected them to be harder. They were not. They were only true. She looked at him, the careful attention of a woman who had been given promises before and learned what they cost when they broke. He lifted his hand and touched her face. Gently, precisely, with the awareness of a man who has waited a very long time for a thing to be right and does not intend to rush the moment it arrives. And he kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was quiet and warm and sure. And the 7 years of restraint and distance and grief behind it made the simplicity of it more powerful than anything else could have been. When they drew apart, her forehead rested against his. 7 years is a long time, she said. Yes, he said. I am sorry it took that long. I arrived rather recently, she said. And her voice was warm. I am not complaining, he almost smiled. That may be the first thing I have heard you say that I do not entirely believe. She laughed, and this time so did he. They were moving back toward the ballroom when Mrs. Holloway appeared from the corridor leading to the east wing. She was carrying something small and flat and sealed in wax, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has found something significant and is not certain what she is about to set in motion. Your lordship, they both turned, during the cleaning. For the ball, we moved her ladyship's old writing desk, the mahogany one. From the east wing storage, Mrs. Holloway's voice was unsteady. There was a drawer that had jammed years ago. We forced it open to clean it properly, and this was wedged behind it. It appears to have been there a very long time. She held out the letter. It was addressed in a hand Aldous recognized immediately. A hand he had not seen in 7 years for Aldous. To be opened when the time is right, and beneath it, in the same hand, a smaller line that had not been sealed. You will know when Aldous took it, and his face, which had become so alive that evening, went very still, in a way that was different from his usual control. This was not discipline. This was a man standing at the edge of something enormous. Cordelia looked at him, and she looked at the letter, and she understood without being told exactly what it was, and whose hand had written it. She touched his arm. Briefly, lightly. I will go back to the ballroom, she said. And she gave him the corridor. She gave him the letter. She gave him the space to open something that was between him and a woman who had loved him before she did. And she did it without being asked. And it was, perhaps, the kindest thing that had happened in Ashbridge Hall in 7 years. Aldous stood alone. He opened it. He read it once, then twice. With the noise of the ball faint behind the closed doors, Rosalind had written it months before she died. Not on the last night, but in one of those quiet periods of clarity that come to a person who has looked ahead and decided to prepare. She had always been thoughtful in that particular way. She had always understood him better than he understood himself. She wrote that she knew him. She wrote that she knew how deeply he loved, how completely, and how the depth of it would become the weight of it if she were not there to carry it with him. She wrote that she did not want his love to become a prison. She wrote that the love he had given her was real and permanent, and that real and permanent things do not require punishment to prove themselves. She wrote that if joy ever found its way back to him, not replacing her, never replacing her, but existing alongside the memory of her, the way 2 rooms in a house can both hold warmth, she did not want him to close the door on it. She asked him, very specifically, not to turn loyalty into a tomb. She asked him, very gently, to live. And then, at the bottom, in smaller letters, there is one more thing I need you to do, my love, and it is the hardest. Open his door, say his name. He was here. He was ours. 20 minutes is not nothing. 20 minutes was a whole life, and he was loved for every second of it. Do not lock our Alaric away in the dark as if he were a shame. He was a joy. Open the door. Let the light in. For him and for you. She signed it with her name, and beneath the signature, you have always known how to love well, Aldous. Trust that. Trust yourself. He stood in the corridor of his own house, in the coat he had worn to the first ball Ashbridge Hall had hosted in 7 years, and he let the last chain break. It did not break dramatically. It broke quietly, the way ice breaks in spring. Not all at once, but in the subtle shift of a thing that has been held against its nature for too long, and is finally allowed to move. He folded the letter. He placed it in the inner pocket of his coat, next to the note Cordelia had left with the blanket weeks before. And he went upstairs. He found her in the corridor outside the nursery. She had come up after the ball wound down. Not to find him. She had not known he would be there. She had simply found herself at the end of the 3rd-floor corridor, the way she had before. Drawn by some instinct she had never interrogated, she was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her shoes off, her silk stockings and pale blue skirts looking entirely out of place against the cold stone. She looked up when she heard him, and she saw his face, and she knew, without being told, that the letter had mattered. He sat down across from her, in the same position they had taken weeks ago. Before any of this had been said or admitted, the floor was cold, the corridor was dark. Except for the small lamp she had carried up. She told me to live, he said. Cordelia said nothing. She let him have the words. She knew, he said. She knew I would do this. Hold on, hold still. Hold everything exactly where it was. Because moving felt like leaving her behind. She knew before she died that she would have to tell me she had not abandoned me, that the love she gave me was still real. Even with her gone, he paused, she was always cleverer than I was. She sounds remarkable, Cordelia said. She was. He looked at the locked door. She would have been very irritated with me. For these 7 years, I imagined she would, Cordelia agreed, with a gentleness that was also very slightly honest. Something moved across his face that was almost a smile. He stood. He reached up to the hook beside the nursery door, and he took down the key. He had not touched it in 7 years. He put it in the lock, and it turned. With the small, clean sound of a thing that has been waiting very patiently to be allowed to do its one job, the door opened. The nursery was smaller than she had imagined, and more carefully preserved than she expected. Not because it had been maintained for use, but because nothing in it had been touched. Dust lay light on everything. softened by 7 years of closed-door air. There was a cradle near the window, cream-painted, with a small carved bird on one end. There was a shelf with things arranged on it. A rattle, 2 cloth animals, a christening gift, still in its box, unopened. There was a chair beside the window, where someone had once sat, to wait. Aldous stood in the center of the room for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and pulled back the curtains. The storm had passed. The night was clear. Stars hung over the moors, hard and bright and very far up, and the moon laid a path of light across the frozen garden below. The light came into the nursery. For the first time in 7 years, Rosalind, he said, quietly, to the room, and then. After a pause that was its own kind of completeness, Alaric, the name of the son who had lived for 20 minutes. On the night of January the 14th, 7 years before, he said it aloud. In the room that had been prepared for him and never held him, and the room received it, without collapsing. The walls stayed up, the ceiling held. The chair by the window remained a chair by a window, and the name spoken at last did not break the house, it opened it. Cordelia stood in the doorway. She did not go in unless invited. She held the lamp. "Come in," he said. She came in. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. And she did not speak, because there was nothing that needed saying. She took his hand, and he held it, not with the careful brevity of the other times, but with the quiet steadiness of a man who has decided not to let go. They stood at the window of the nursery together, with the moon over the fields and the stars over the moors, and the lamp burning warm behind them. And Ashbridge Hall was quiet around them, in a way that was entirely different from before. Before, it had been the quiet of absence. Now it was the quiet of peace. 3 days later, he asked her to marry him. In the music room. He did not plan it elaborately. He had tried elaborate in his youth and found that his heart preferred precision. He had the fire lit, the pianoforte uncovered, 2 candles on the mantel. And that was the whole of the preparation. She came in from the library, where she had been helping Lucian reorganize an archive that had been in disorder for 6 years, and she stopped in the doorway. When she saw the uncovered pianoforte, and the fire, and his face, which was composed in a different way than usual, the way of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it. "Sit down," he said. She sat at the pianoforte. Old habit, he stood beside it. But this time he did not put his hands on the keys. He put them in his pockets, and he looked at her, and he said the thing he had thought through over 3 days and 4 sleepless nights, and 1 long ride across the frozen north fields. "You arrived at Ashbridge Hall as a mistake," he said, "brought by a deception I had no part in arranging, and was furious about." For roughly 3 days, she almost smiled. "You then proceeded to become impossible to ignore. Through a combination of clumsiness, intelligence, courage, and a dog with the worst judgment in Derbyshire, she did smile. You played music in a room that had been silent for 7 years. You left a blanket and a note for a man who had forgotten how to accept kindness. You sat on the floor outside a locked door and said nothing, which was the most useful thing anyone has done for me in a very long time. You found, in 3 years of stolen ledgers, the truth that saved my family, and you tried to walk into the snow to protect us, which I will be arguing with you about for the rest of our lives." Her eyes were bright. "You did not replace Rosalind," he said. "You never tried to, and I loved you for that before I was willing to admit I loved you for anything. What you did was something else. You taught me that a man who has been buried is still a man. That warmth is not betrayal. You reminded me that this house was built to hold a life, not a monument. And you filled it with extraordinary disorder," he paused, "and I have found that the disorder is the point." He took a breath. "I am asking you to be my wife. Not because my brother arranged it. Not because you have nowhere else to go, though I intend to make certain you always have somewhere to go. Not because you made me laugh, though I intend to let you keep doing that. But because I love you, and I choose you, and I want to wake in this house and know that you are in it." Cordelia stood up from the bench. She stood up too quickly, which caught the edge of the music stand, which tipped to the left, which would have sent 4 sheets of scarlatti across the floor, except that Aldous, who had been watching for exactly this, reached out and caught it with one hand. They both looked at the music stand. They both looked at each other. "Yes," she said. He set down the music stand. He crossed the room. He cupped her face in both hands, tilted her toward him, and the firelight was warm on them both, and the pianoforte stood uncovered behind her, and Ashbridge Hall was alive around them. In every room she had opened, every fire she had lit, every curtain she had pulled back, and he kissed her. with the particular thoroughness of a man who has been waiting for this since a January afternoon when she landed at his feet. And from somewhere below the kitchen, probably, Biscuit began to bark, with the righteous indignation of an animal who has not been adequately informed of major developments. They broke apart. Aldous looked toward the door, then back at her, and he laughed. They were married on the 15th of March, in the small church at the foot of the estate road, which had married Greaves men for 200 years and had not been asked to marry one in 7. It was not a large wedding. Aldous had never wanted large, and Cordelia had never had the circumstances for it, and together they found they preferred the intimacy of a ceremony witnessed by people who mattered rather than performed for people who were merely present. Lucien stood beside his brother, forgiven, lighter than he had been in years. Cordelia had forgiven him entirely, on the one condition that he never again arrange anyone's life through forged correspondence. And he had agreed it was a fair condition, and maintained, quietly, that the results had been excellent, and Aldous had given him the look he had been giving Lucien since they were children. Which meant, do not press your luck. Mrs. Holloway sat in the first pew and maintained her composure until the vows, at which point she gave up maintaining it entirely. Mr. Pruitt stood at the back, with the careful stillness of a man feeling considerable things and having decided to show none of them. Cordelia came down the aisle in pale ivory, with 2 cream roses at her collar, and Aldous watched her come toward him and felt the specific, unambiguous thing a man feels when he understands that his life has just divided into before and after. In the months that followed, Ashbridge Hall became something it had not been since the winter Rosalind died. Not the same. Something different. Something that honored what it had been while becoming what it was now. Rosalind's portrait was moved from the veiled storage back to the upper gallery, where it had always hung, unveiled, properly framed, flanked by the winter flowers she had loved. Her memory was not buried, it was kept, held with the tenderness that belonging to the past does not require pain to maintain. The nursery stayed open, clean, bright, the curtains pulled back. It was not yet a child's room again, but it was no longer a monument, it was a room, waiting, in its own time, which was as it should be. And on a morning in May, Ashbridge Hall was full of the sounds a house is built to hold. The windows were open to the first warm morning of the year. The gardens were turning green, and Cordelia came through the entrance hall with an armful of music and a cup of tea balanced on top of it, which was not a stable arrangement, and Aldous, coming down the main staircase, saw it from the landing. He watched her navigate the hall, past the flowers, past the table, past the suit of armor she still nodded to, out of habit. With the focused determination of a woman who has decided the tea is not going to be sacrificed, she made it most of the way. At the turn of the corridor, her foot caught the edge of the rug. She wobbled. The music went sideways. The tea stayed, somehow intact. She caught herself with one hand on the wall, righted herself, looked at the scattered sheets, looked at the tea, and looked up at him. "You see," she said, "I am improving." He had reached the bottom of the stairs. He came across the hall, gathered the fallen sheets, took the cup of tea from her hand. With the ease of a man who has had months of practice at this exact task, and he looked at her with the expression he had once forgotten how to wear, and had since relearned. In considerable detail. "No, Countess," he said. "I am," she laughed. And from somewhere near the kitchen, Biscuit barked his full agreement, and Aldous Greaves, Earl of Ashbridge, who had not smiled in 7 years, who had locked away music and light and warmth and laughter behind the careful discipline of grief, laughed freely in the hall of his own house, with his wife beside him, and his dog opinionating from the kitchen. And 7 years of winter, finally, completely, irrevocably over. For 7 years, Ashbridge Hall had been a monument to grief, its rooms preserved, its fires cold, its music locked away. But a friendless woman had arrived like a beautiful accident, fallen at the Earl's feet in a heap of skirts and dignity, and taught a grieving man the one thing that 7 years of discipline and ledgers and lonely rides across frozen fields had failed to teach him. That love, when it returns, does not come as betrayal. It comes as grace. And a house that remembers grief can still, in the fullness of time and the warmth of the right presence, remember how to laugh.